Hi, everyone. A very good evening and welcome to this session of the Brand Finance Forum for Asia Pacific for 2021. And thanks for everyone who could join. There are more people who are joining, but we will just start in the interest of time. These are unprecedented times. We don't think we would have ever imagined that we will be doing the forum like this online through a webinar, despite all the technological abilities that we've all generated over the years. In 20 years is the first time that we are actually doing this online. Maybe this is the way we're going to do it in the future, or we might go back to a indoor venue-led event. We will see how things unfold in the coming year. Looks like the Singapore government is going to make all that possible very soon. I'm Samir Dixit. I'm the Managing Director for Brand Finance. This is the annual event that we do where we do announce the top 100 Singapore brands for the year that we are in. MIS has been a supporting partner for our forum for a reasonably long period of time. Roger is also there from MIS. He will also share some of the views. And we have Robin Knack with us, who's going to be also grilled by me after we've announced the brands about how some of the companies have looked at the brands or otherwise. Today is a short session. Those who've attended it in the past may have attended a half-a-day session, but we're going to focus more on the rankings, what they are. We're going to announce the top 10 at first, and we will look at an interesting panel discussion afterwards where we'll all be participating in. The focus will remain as it has always been. Why the brand's important? What is it that should be crucially important to the companies? How should they be managing or looking some of these things? They are part of intangibles, and how some of these should be managed on an ongoing basis. So a little bit about, all right, let me just change my presentation mode. Just give me a second. So I'll hand over to Roger now, who will take you through some of the interesting aspects of what MIS is doing in Singapore and how they support the whole brand agenda from an institutional point of view. And after that, we'll come back and discuss more on the brands. Over to Roger.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roger Wang. I'm the current president of the Marketing Institute of Singapore, Marketing Institute of Singapore Academy, and of course, Marketing Institute of Singapore Business School. Anyway, thanks to Mr. Samir Dixit, has been a long-time friend of MIS. And of course, today, we are certainly very happy to collaborate with Brand Finance in the Asia Pacific Forum 2021. Now, in fact, we have been collaborating for the past, this is our 6 years collaboration. Other than last year itself, because of the pandemic, that we could not have the Brand Asia Pacific Forum, including the award itself. This year, we're certainly very happy that at least we can do this online, okay? And a big thanks to Samir for giving MIS the opportunity for yet another year of good collaboration. And of course, we will look forward towards your announcement of the top 100 brands in Singapore itself. Now, please allow me to do a bit of job as the president of the Marketing Institute of Singapore. Now, just for the benefit of those that don't know us, this will be a very good time for you to find out more about us. Now, the Marketing Institute of Singapore has been around for the past 48 years. Now, we represent Singapore in the area of marketing in the Asia Marketing Federation that comprises of about 17 countries and region. All right, so while MIS over the past 48 years have nurtured more than 50,000 marketing and sales professionals through our executive training courses and some of our academic courses. We want to find them out in the Marketing Institute of Singapore Business School and our Marketing Institute of Singapore Academy. Now, we're certainly very, very glad to actually have, we are always constantly looking for good partners such as Brand Finance, to actually help us in bringing on the message of branding in particular, and of course in marketing, in the area of marketing to the business community, both in Singapore and around the region. And Samir has actually did us a very big favor. You know, over the years, in fact, we learned a lot from Mr. Samir itself, and certainly we are looking to learn a lot more over the years to come. All right, so just to touch a bit on MIS. In fact, MIS, we do conduct executive training courses. For those practitioners out there that, you know, perhaps you find that you need a bit of updating in terms of whatever skill set or knowledge that you have right now, you can always look out for our executive training courses, which stretches over 2 to 3 days. You know, you can always quote where you get your source from brand finance. You'll be able to enjoy some form of knockoff from our regular price. And in fact, today, we are certainly very, very happy, and we really highly anticipate the top 100 brands being nominated by Brand Finance. Okay, now over the past 1 year, in fact, there are a lot of changes in terms of the business landscape in Singapore and around the region. Now, there are a lot of big brand names that fold up. One, for example, Robinson, you know, the one that I can just think of my mind right now. So after more than 100 over years in Singapore itself, finally, it has to come to a stop, and, you know, goes beyond the physical stores, going on digitalization right now. So perhaps there are a lot of business that actually are going through transformation in the area of digitalization. If you were to follow MIS itself, we actually talked about digitalization many years back, right? But it actually takes a pandemic to actually push the notion of digitalization forward, in fact, by a lot of small and medium enterprise in Singapore itself. So, you know, later, perhaps during the panel sessions, we'll be able to share some of the case studies or some of the well-known cases in Singapore on how branding has actually helped them in the area through digitalization in terms of business sustenance and business growth. All right, so I think enough said. I think more importantly, I think today is to actually anticipate the top 100 brands in Singapore itself. So Singapore has always been known in the region as the epitome in terms of brand building, and there are a lot of regional setups that are in Singapore. Okay, so Singapore is always the center when it comes to business excellence and finance. So certainly today's forum itself, I think we can always look forward towards a lot of insights coming from experts like Mr. Robin and Mr. Samil. And of course, I'll share some points from a business owner itself on how during this pandemic, what are the challenges that we face, and how I think branding, it's important, the ever importance of branding itself that actually helped us to steer through during this period of time. So without further ado, I would like to actually pass on the platform to Mr. Samir, and good luck to all those that were being nominated, and hope to see you guys again later. Mr. Samir.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you very much for that introduction, and really appreciate the continued support from MIS, not just to us, but to the business and marketing fraternity as a whole across Singapore. Just allow me to share my screen again. All right, so coming back to the Brand Finance Singapore Forum for 2021, we are going to have an interesting debate about the brand or the business, or as we call it, the intangible versus the business. What is more important of the two? Why should one focus one or the other, or on both, or as the companies look at it? So we will look at it from various perspectives, various point of views, ours as well as external. Just a quick update about Brand Finance before we move on. We are the world's largest independent brand valuation firm, and that's how we started. But over the years, we have taken the brand valuation and started applying it as a tool to drive some decision science in everything that a company does. So it's no more just a number that you would look at once a year. Everything that an organization does on the marketing side, on the business side, on the product side, you can actually quantify the contribution of that activity in terms of how much has it able to contribute to the value of the brand, or in some cases, it may also destroy some of the value of the brand that you have generated over the years. So there are different sides to it. There are different aspects to it. These are the world's only ISO compliant values that are published. Brand Finance is the only firm in the world that's got 3 certifications, 2 ISOs and an MASP certification. The MASP certification is Marketing Accountability Standards Board through the MMAP, which is the Marketing Metric Audit Protocol that they follow, which is basically a formal process of validating the relationship that you have between marketing and measurements and financial performance. So it's a very, very critical subject to address going forward now, with budgets under pressure, market conditions changing around us all the time. People need to link how the marketing efforts, how the brand efforts are managed to contribute to the shareholders and to the overall success of the business. I'm not going to give you a very detailed explanation. This is more like a very short, quick crash course on how this is all done. I've talked about the ISO compliance and the framework that we use here. There are 2 ISOs, as I said, ISO 2067, which is about the brand evaluation. And interestingly, this ISO framework actually almost mirrors our brand strength index that we've been using for the past 20 years. So that's a great support for our processes and methodologies from an external point of view. On the right-hand side, you see the ISO 10668. That's the ISO for the valuation, which is when we're calculating the monetary value of the brand. And basically, that also looks at what all must be examined in order to calculate the value. So you cannot take really shortcuts. You cannot ignore certain aspects. If you do, it may still be a good valuation, but it may not be ISO compliant valuation. So just keep those things in mind in case any of you are engaging anyone in some of these activities. There are ISOs that are associated with the valuation, and they are important for to be followed or to be included in the project that you may be doing with someone. Primarily 3 ways of valuing anything. Those of you who may be wondering how are these things valued, there's a market approach, there's a cost approach, and an income approach. These are not proprietary to Brand Finance. These are the approaches that are followed around the world. I'll give you a quick and layman's explanation of each one of these. The market approach basically looks at what's the going price of an asset in the market. So let's say if I were to buy a building, I will check the price for the nearby buildings, and I'll use that as a benchmark to say, all right, how much should I be paying for this building? The cost approach looks at the cost of replacement, or the cost to recreate an asset. And so, for example, if I were to apply to the same building, I look at the cost of land, the cost of construction, the time that I'm going to spend on construction, all the efforts, etc. And when I add them up, it tells me this is the cost that it will be for recreating these assets. And now if someone is asking me for a price that even maybe 10–15% more, I should be roughly okay with that. So the cost approach looks at the cost to recreate. A lot of times this is applied more for, let's say, plant and machineries or factories or some processes or even some of the patents. So you may apply different approaches in different contexts and different situations. The income approach on the other side looks at, if I were to buy the same building that I've just explained using market approach and cost approach, I will look at how much money can I earn from this building in the future. And that based on the income generating ability of the asset. The brands are valued using the income approach. Now, under the income approach, there are direct methods and indirect methods. There is a royalty relief method under the direct methods, and that is the process and the approach that's used to calculate the value of the brands in the rankings that we publish every year, not just in Singapore, but around the world. We publish almost 5,000 plus rankings around the world each year. Royalty relief, why is that a preferred approach by us? Not because we are in love with it or not because that's something that we have more specialization in than the others. We specialize in all the approaches with equal amount of ability. Royalty relief is the most recommended approach by International Valuation Standards Council, that's the IVSC. It is also the approach that is usually more acceptable should there be a dispute, it's more acceptable to the tax authorities for a variety of reasons. It is also acceptable to the auditors. So there are a variety of reasons why that's a preferred approach and why that approach should be used in an overall scheme of things. So that's just about the general crash course in valuation. Anyone wants to know more about it, feel free to give us a call and we will be happy to come to your office and explain it more in detail to you or your management and whoever else would be interested in doing that. Very quickly, what the elements of value calculation that come together. The first and most important is the brand strength, and that is where the marketing also comes in. The brand strength is the most important factor as the starting point. If a brand is weak, it'll have less value. If the brand is strong, it'll have more value. If a brand is strong, it will generate more business. It will drive more footfalls. You can ask for more profits from the customers. So when you buy an Apple phone, for example, you pay a really, really large sum for it. Other than if I were to hide the logo from the phone and put my name on it, probably even my family would not buy that phone after looking at my name on it. The second step after the strength comes the royalty application. So if a strong brand will attract higher royalty, remember the royalty relief approach, and a weaker brand will attract lower royalties. Those royalties are applied to the future earnings of the brand. We look at it in two parts. One is the explicit period for which we have the forecast in, which is 5 years, that we can capture from external sources. And we also use the calculation for perpetuity because the brand is not going to die in 3 or 5 years. Sometimes you may have a different situation where the auditors might look at it differently, but we don't believe the brands are going to die in 3 or 5 or 10 or 20 years unless there is empirical evidence to show that. And then, of course, there are because this is all future earnings, we discounted net present value, tax adjustments, etc. are done, and that's how you get the value of the brand. So that's really the overall framework of how the value is calculated. May sound very simple, but it takes an enormous amount of time for our extremely hardworking team sitting in London, sitting in Sri Lanka, sitting here in Singapore and some other parts of the world. And they do a lot of work for almost for 3.5, 4 months to make this happen for you guys. So the Singapore top 100 brands. I'm going to share the top 10 and some of the special mentions. Those who are interested in knowing more about it, please feel free to go to our website where the report is available for download. Go to brandfinance.com, very simple to remember. If you still are not sure where to find it on the website, feel free to write to me or to Bernard. He will leave his email address in the comments section, so you can all just keep a copy of it there, and we'll be more than happy to help you. While you're on the website, do see some of our other reports and rankings from around the world. There are a lot of interesting white papers you can download. There are also some very interesting analysis that you can do for yourself, for your brand, which can also be downloaded. So those are the dashboards that you can download. So do keep an eye on it and do visit the website. Since we're talking about intangibles, I just want to put some context about the importance of intangibles for the business, for the organization as a whole. As Warren Buffett said once, I would rather invest in intangibles than tangibles. And most of the investors actually see a great deal of value in investing in intangibles, because those are the ones that really drive the value of the business as a whole. Who would have imagined that a company without owning a single car, or a company without owning a single room, would be valued for hundreds of billions of dollars? And I'm talking about Airbnbs and Ubers of the world. They're very asset light in an overall scheme of things. What they have is the intangibles. And that's why you see people wonder, but they're all loss-making companies. Why are they getting such high valuations? The intangibles, not really what they earn today, but the potential that they have for the future, not just for the brand activities that they're using currently for, but whole lot of other activities that they have the potential to get into. So that's the importance of the intangible. I'm going to show you a very quick example. We use some older figures so that it doesn't spark a different debate. This is not to drive any debate or speculation at this stage. So here are some of the, here's a breakdown of Google on 31st October 2016. If you look at it here, that's the value, enterprise value of the business, and look at the tangible assets and how small they are. It's only 49 billion. The larger part is intangible value, the green part. Within that, if you look at the disclosed and undisclosed intangibles, disclosed are really small again, and the undisclosed intangibles are really large. Why am I sharing all this? Because there are a lot of undisclosed intangibles. So what is not known, what is not published in black and white, is usually also not so much in the forefront for the management, not so much in the forefront for other stakeholders, and they tend to focus more on the balance sheet and the business and a whole lot of other things that they can actually see and analyze and evaluate on a daily basis. And that's what sort of puts the whole intangible more at the back burner, more as and when we need to know, or when we're going for an acquisition or an M&A or divestment, we'll then worry about it. That's not how it should be. Now, if you look at here, the marketing intangibles are 30%, the technology intangibles. So there's a breakdown of the various types of intangibles in the business, the customer intangibles, the contracts, and then what's left is the goodwill for the company, which is only 10% practically, and the rest of the intangibles are pretty large. And the brand as value as calculated at the point in time was $109 billion. Now, look at that a few months later in February 2016. The enterprise value went up by about 16 million. For 399 became 415. But look at the tangible asset increase is 20. So the increase here and the intangible asset is 346. They went down. But the brand value actually increased by almost 60-70% of what was the increase of the value on the intangibles, or the enterprise value increase. A large part of that actually went to the value of increase of the brand. So some of the other intangibles did reduce. So brand is one of the strongest intangible, is one of the most valuable intangible among the other intangibles that you may have. And that's why it is very, very important to make sure that the management has a good sense of what's driving it, what are the factors that are contributing to the increase, what are the factors that are contributing to the overall decrease, should there be. Moving on to the the BV to EV. Now, when I talked about the enterprise value and the brand value, there usually is a percentage that can be looked at. We do publish it in our reports, and it is important to look at just quickly to explain what the number means. Here we've used some category examples of watches and luxury goods and luxury cars. These have different numbers for different categories, different segments. Banks, for example, have 22% average BV to EV. What this means is the higher this percentage means the brand is driving the business success much more strongly than if this number was way too lower, than the other way around. If the number is low, that means the brand is doing or contributing little to the business success. You may be growing, you may be successful for a variety of other reasons. It could be that you have a monopoly in the market. It could be that you have one of the largest footprints in the market. It could be that you have a lot of sales push or a lot of promotions, a lot of price cuts that are happening in the market. And that might just grow your business, but it definitely would not be the brand. So you look at watches and luxury segments, 35 to 40%. That's almost half the value of the business is in the brand. We do a very large study every year. It's called GIFT Global Intangible Financial Tracker. We track 57,000 companies across 120 stock exchanges around the world every year. And there, the global average is 48 to 52% of a company's value is in the intangible. And if the companies are not really aligned to that, if they don't know what drives them up or down, effectively, the management is only managing half the company. And that's not a very happy situation for the investors. These are all the brands that we've used and the averages of them. You can later see, for example, when I present the rankings for the banks in Singapore, then you can see 22% is the global average. How do they stack up against that global average? All right. We've usually seen the brands, our rankings and the values, they're very, very top heavy. And this is a good example of that. And at the same time, the enterprise value has been increasing in Singapore and the brand value is going down. That's also a measure of what's happening in the market externally. Due to COVID, the stock prices haven't really taken as bad a hit because markets do remain buoyant. Shareholders are sort of okay and looking forward to certain recoveries and recovery cycles, and the brand value is going down. What this does for the management is it gives them a false sense of comfort that because my share price is increasing, because my enterprise value is increasing, my brand value is also increasing. Not the case at all. In fact, there is no direct correlation or proven correlation that if one goes up, the other will definitely go up, or if one goes down, the other will definitely go down. The example I would use is if your enterprise value is zero, let's say your company has been shut down, the enterprise value is zero, your brand will still have a value and a reasonably high value in certain cases, depending on what that brand has been historically. There's no correlation. So people sort of get a false sense of comfort when they see the enterprise value goes up. And again, we always suggest if you want to focus on the intangible, focus on the value of the intangibles. Don't use the enterprise value or your stock price or your balance sheet as a benchmark of that being increasing or decreasing. Overall, for the 100 brands, this is how the breakdown has been. The top 10 have 62% of the value, followed by, when you look at the 10 brands ranked 11 to 20 at 16%, there's a sheer drop. And that's something that we've seen across the markets in ASEAN, specifically markets which are not necessarily very strongly brand focused, where there aren't very many big brands coming from the market. You will see these kind of skews happening all the time. 21 to 30th ranked brand, only 9% of the total value, and it just continues to fall off the cliff. Sadly, when you look at the 51 to 100, only 4% of the total value that we just saw is across the 50 brands. And top 10 enjoy 62%. Is there something seriously wrong with these brands? The short answer is they may not be as brand focused as the top 10 guys are, and that's what's wrong with them fundamentally, perhaps. Nothing else, because they're operating in the same market. Some of them are also competing in similar categories, maybe at a smaller scale, but there's no reason why the value could not be higher in relative terms. So 96% versus 4% is really the contrast that I want to put across, to say the brands at the bottom and the 50 brands at the on the lower side are really way off on the scale. New entrants. Every year there are new entrants, and I think it's time to congratulate some of the new entrants that have entered the brand rankings for the first time. Some of them are newly listed, and that's why they enter the rankings. Some of them are probably not within the top 100. They were outside of the top 100, and they've grown very well over the year, and that's how they've entered the ranking. So brands do come in and go out, but fundamentally they all have to be listed to be on our rankings. If you're not a listed brand, you may not then be allowed to be on the ranking unless all your financials are declared in the public domain. So you will see some of the state-run enterprises in some of the markets which are government-owned. They do publish all the financials, they do publish all the related information, and then we do include them. But otherwise, we need all the information for it to be coming in. 5 new entrants: Mind Champs, AEM, UG Healthcare, Creative, and Money Max. So again, a heartiest congratulations. There would have been a big round of applause if this was a session that we were doing in the auditorium setting, but my heartiest congratulations to each one of them nonetheless. 62% top 10 enjoying a very large portion of that value share that we just talked about. Let's see how they stack up. Well, DBS continues to fly the #1 flag, 9th year running, so it'll be interesting. We don't think there is anyone in any position to dethrone them next year, but we always challenge the second and the third and the fourth guys to say, guys, if you can do something about it, it'll be an interesting battle to have. But over the years, we've seen the gaps do tend to increase. 7.8 billion is the value. BV to market cap is 17% here. AAA, that's the rating that we give them for the brand strength. It is based on a score out of 100. So when we calculate the brand strength index, we give them a score out of 100, and that's then converted to a AAA plus, AAA minus, AA plus, AA minus. It goes all the way down to D. This is not the S&P rating. This is not a credit rating of any sort. This is the rating for the brand strength that we have calculated for the brands, and that's how into it. So the higher rating, the stronger your brand is, the better your ability to compete, the better your ability to drive your business success with lesser effort, I would say. Number 2, no surprise, OCBC. AAA minus rating, 4.5 billion is the value. So 7.8 and 4.5, bit of catch up to do, but if they go after certain acquisitions, like DBS had acquired ANZ in the region recently, a few years ago, and that has also helped them increase the value in many different ways. So if OCBC has any acquisition targets, it might be an interesting battle to watch in the future. 3.998 billion, just a tad below 4 billion for UOB. Well, it has a nice ring to it. So again, if there were 4 billion, I'm sure they'll be working very hard to catch up with OCBC, and they should be. They did catch them for a brief moment for 1 year, and then they did fall back after that again. Singtel, 3.1 billion, AAA, 18%. Number 5, Great Eastern, AAA minus. The interesting thing is, if you see here, is all the brands are extremely, extremely strong brands. They're all AAA rated brands. So when you are looking at your rankings, and those of you who will look at the report and who will take it to the management, one of the things that you should working towards driving within the management is not just the value, but let's make our brand stronger. Let's make it more competitive, and the value will increase. So focus on just as much increasing the strength of the brand, which is a factor of what you're doing in the market, what equity that's generating, and then how does that equity translate to your business performance. So we bring all the three under a single framework when we are actually calculating the strength of the brand. And that gives you a really, really nice and robust and comparable analysis for the brand strength, as against someone just measuring the equity, someone just looking at the financial side of it, someone just looking at the product development and input side of it. And that may not necessarily give you a more holistic picture as a brand strength index would. Singapore Airlines used to be number 3 for a very long time. Has been dropping for obvious reasons. We are very confident soon as the skies open up, soon as this pandemic restrictions are lifted, they will be back in shape. They will be driving the revenue. But look at it in a slightly different manner. We all know they've been posting losses. We all know they've been grounded, but still they have a $1.1 billion value, which is still 8% of their BV to EV. The brand still remains strong. AA is a reasonably strong rating, despite being grounded for nearly a year and a half or 2 years, perhaps. So the brand remains strong. If you make it stronger, it would then not lose that strength overnight, or it'll continue to drive the survival of the business even through difficult times. And that's really the key point here for the brand strength. SPC, 1 billion, again, 18% BV to EV. There's something very interesting, and I want to mention that here, is the branding. And sometimes when companies are rebranding themselves, they do tend to take a very casual approach. Sometimes they say, all right, we'll do part of it now, we'll do the other part later. We saw that when Tiger Airways was being rebranded. Some parts were rebranded, some parts continued to have the old branding, some planes continue to have old brandings. The outside branding was new, the inside branding was old, the uniforms of staff were all sort of. Do not make that mistake, because that causes confusion in the market. And SPC, the reason I'm mentioning that is, if you go around, they were bought over by PetroChina. So a lot of their petrol stations have now been rebranded to PetroChina. A lot of them have been rebranded with the PetroChina logo, but SPC written in a very different font at bottom. And some of them still carry this branding. And that causes a fair bit of confusion, A. B, when we're doing the valuation for them, anything that's been branded PetroChina now, we have to actually take it out because it's no longer using the SPC brand. We have to take it out of the analysis. The financial contribution from those have to be taken out of the analysis. So when you're making some of these rebranding decisions and other brand-related decisions, do keep in mind what is the impact on the intangible that this is likely to cause when you make these decisions, and when you implement them in the marketplace, what kind of confusion they might cause, or would they really increase your brand value or not. Wilmar, 2% BV to EV, commodity brand, just under $1 billion. Honestly, 20 years ago, you may not even have heard of Wilmar. Very interestingly, they actually used to make BlackBerry phones. The most important tool that the business community used to own was the BlackBerry, and they used to make it here. Tiger Beer, new entrant for the first time in the top 10. So again, heartiest congratulations to them. Well, that's one good thing that probably the pandemic has done, is a lot of beer has been ordered at home, and people are actually saying, all right, let's just celebrate the best way we can, or let's just, so a lot of liquor sales have increased. I mean, the amount of websites that I've seen and the amount of discounts that I've seen going around for the beverage and the liquor industry is really, really crazy over the last 1.5 years. But having said that, strong brand, 19% BV to AV, and in the top 10 for the first time. The last on the top 10 is Olam, 8% BV to EV. Interestingly enough, if you look at Olam and Wilmar here, both are B2B brands in very different ways. They both look at how they're both operating. Wilmar is a stronger brand. They've got A+ rating, and Olam has got A rating, but the BV to EV is 8%. And that just shows that there is little more brand focus and a little more brand contribution that they have within the organization than Wilmar has. They're better known to the people. So when we actually go and start doing the equity analysis, etc., we would probably see that the equity is higher than Wilmar within the market. Some special mentions now. DBS, not only they're the number one, they're also the strongest brand in Singapore. It's a double congratulations to them. 87 out of 100 is the score for brand strength index, and that's really, really high. With a AAA rating. We have the most improved brand, which is Tiger Beer. By absolute value, they've had a $183 million increase in the value. Now just pause for a moment and say, all right, how much money would they spend during the pandemic, or how much money, let's just say a marketing campaign in the last 1.5 years would cost you? If it, let's say, cost you $5 million, $2 million, $10 million, and if that can increase the brand value by $183 million, which is the return that the shareholders are looking for, that the investors are looking for, what's wrong with that? So that's how you should start to look at things in a slightly different perspective, to say what I'm spending and what incremental returns I'm getting for the value of the brand could be a very good benchmark for you to start planning your marketing budgets around, or use that as a baseline to drive your marketing budget. So even protect it come the fourth quarter, when usually they're asked by the CFOs. There's a good reason for you to protect it by showcasing, to say, if you cut my marketing budget now, I might lose $100 million in brand value by you cutting my $500,000, and then suddenly the whole conversation will be very different. So that's how you protect the intangibles. That's how you protect the investment on the intangibles. Most improved brand, Nera, still growing. From BBB, they became A-. So again, a good improvement there overall. Highest ranking growth is iFast. They've climbed 16 places on the rankings. So again, congratulations to them. So that's all on the top 100 brand rankings. Outside the top 10, we usually would have given you a copy of the report soon after the event, but do, like I said, do go to our website. You can download a copy for your reference. If you're finding any problems, do write to us, and we'll be more than happy to send you a soft copy of it. All right, now brand or business. So I've set the picture, I've set the context. I think I've given some thoughts to chew on to the two panelists that we have here. And we also want to now just get into the debate. But before we do that, I just want to give some more context to the value and the value drivers. So you've seen the brand value increase for these brands from A to B. Some have gone down, some have gone up. And there are primarily three reasons why the value usually goes up or down when we're looking at the calculation. It's either the brand or the business or external factors. So let's look at DBS. Yes, the value has gone down from 9 billion to 7.8 billion, but that has happened to the banking sector as a whole around the world. So they're not in any disadvantageous position as we speak. Now let's see what has caused the decrease. The brand has actually contributed a $236 million to the value. So 8473 would have increased by 236 million. The business actually contributed a $393 million negative contribution, and the external factors had a $500 million negative contribution. Now, when you look at this, the brand, business, external, what do you control and what you don't control very much? External factors are hardly ever in your control. What the government policies are going to do, what kind of restrictions the regulators are going to put in, what market conditions, competitors. So all those, there's a lot of external, what tax rates are going to change, for example. There are a lot of external factors that you don't have any control over. Move over to the business performance again. A lot of factors that may or may not allow you to have full control on the business as a whole. What you have full control over is really your brand. And that's where a positive contribution is always something that we look for. You should not have a hugely negative contribution on the brand side. Business performance, external factors, depending on the market conditions, would go up or down. Now, this drop of this total value of 7.8 billion would have been a lot less had there been no contribution from the brand to the extent there has been. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is the brand team can say, what is my ROI on my marketing and brand investment? $236 million would be a good number for them to take to the management to say, that's my ROI for all the budgets that are spent over the last 1 year. Now, returns, business may have spent a few $100 million in growing their businesses, and they got a negative return technically for the contribution for the intangible value. The brands may have spent $500,000, $1 million, $5 million, and got a $236 million return. So there are different ways to look at some of these things, and it's how you take it to the management is where some of the differences lie. But I would say, since the brand is the only thing that you may control 100% versus business and external elements, that's where the focus should always be. So hopefully that sort of got the thinking gears moving between Roger and Robin. I'll just quickly take a few more examples and then we'll start the discussion. OCBC, again, while the value dropped, similar increase of brand strength, business performance, external, both have gone down due to the environment that we are facing. Singtel, again, dropped the value a bit. Interestingly here, while the value dropped, the brand also did not contribute to the value increase or decrease. It's a minus 1 million that they had, 494 million for business performance. So their share price may be going up. There are a lot of other things that might be happening, but here the brand contribution is not as effective as it should have been or could have been. And one of the reasons is the brand strength has not been moving at all. It's been flat, it's been static, and the brand is not getting any stronger relative to the competitors. And it is very important that that keeps moving. Otherwise, your brand strength will not improve. Tiger Beer, good example again. Strong business performance, strong brand contribution, external factors is where they've sort of got hit. So again, I'm not going to share all of them, but just a few examples to paint a more holistic picture about the brand, business, and external factors contributing to the value increase or decrease, and how some of these things should be looked at as you take these reports to the management, as you start following your brand values, as you start following your brand rankings. Do keep all these things in mind. Over to Roger and Robin, now for some insights. I'm going to stop sharing that and very quickly ask them both at first. What do you think, from your point of view, is important to the organizations? Do they put more focus on brand or more on business?
Who would you like to go first, Samir?
Either of you. Maybe Robin can go first.
Okay. I mean, this is for us sort of a conversation that we've been having for as long as I can remember, 30 years. I've been in Singapore and even longer than that. I don't think they're binary. I think sometimes people think that the business conversation and the branding conversation are in some way mutually exclusive, and I think that is a fundamental mistake. If you take a step back and look at what a brand actually delivers to people out there, to consumers of any particular product or segment, a brand provides familiarity, it provides trust, it provides confidence, it provides a mark of differentiation. So building a brand should actually be a very fundamental part of a business's growth strategy. And so I think one of the tasks that the marketing community has, both in an organization and outside, is to, I guess, challenge that misplaced perception that you can either grow business or you can grow brand, but with a zero-sum game, you can't do both. And I think that's a fundamental bit of resetting that needs to land itself on the C-suite floor and in the boardroom tables, because I think a good brand is actually a really powerful way to grow business more efficiently, more cost effectively. And I'll talk a bit more about some of that. I'll let Roger maybe just jump in and add.
Roger, let me just add a bit to that. And in Marketing Institute of Singapore, can I just ask, and it's a bit of a trick question, and sorry for putting that as a starting point for you. How many of your courses are focused on brand, and how many of your courses are focused on marketing and other things?
Hi, Samuel. Yes, well, before I begin, perhaps, I do agree with what Robin had said. Seriously, a lot of companies is actually marked between business and brands. Now, back to MIS itself, yes, we have over 180 over courses, executive courses, and a large portion actually falls in terms of towards brand building or brand related or marketing related function that actually teaches you on how to actually build a brand or how to evaluate your brand itself. And of course, there's a different aspect in terms of sales and marketing that which should translate to business growth. So I would say it's almost on par, equal on 50-50 ratio itself. So I hope that answered to your questions. And back towards the business versus brand. I own, in fact, a couple of business. In fact, during pandemic time, where we know that business will actually take a hit in terms of the income, that's where most of the companies or even my peer itself focuses on bringing and building the intangible assets, and that is brand in specific. And this is where it allows us to actually build our differentiation factor itself towards the industries that we are in. All right. For example, maybe just to share a story with you, Samir, if you allow me. In fact, just a couple of days back, I was visiting this regular place that I used to go for my breakfast, and I was surprised to find that the place was closed. It's just a small hawker store that has been in existence for the past 30 years. Now imagine that, if the owner of the stores would have known that the value is not just in the business, but rather the intangible assets of all these years through his service to his regular clients, and at the same time, taking note on the brand value that he actually has built over the past 20 to 30 years, I would believe that the business will probably survive right up to today. So in a nutshell itself, in fact, this has been really highly neglected, except by, in fact, the brand value or the brand strength itself. I think most of them that pick up are large corporations. I think a lot of small and medium enterprise overlook that part itself. I think, Samir, there are a lot to be done in terms of educating not just the large corporation, but more on the small and medium enterprise that constitute to the majority of our economy in Singapore itself.
All right. Interesting that you've mentioned about the small and large businesses, and we'll just come back to that in a while. Just for all the participants and the audiences, we do have, you can ask questions. We do have some interesting audience polls that I'll keep asking or running as we go along. If there's an interesting question that you want the speakers and the panelists to answer, do post it, and we will be happy to answer. Just coming back to a quick related question is, the word intangibles, is it really easily understood as brand? Because we mention it amongst ourselves in a more sort of, is it very trade language? Is it a very technical term, or do companies actually understand intangibles?
Let me have a sort of start on that, as I had sort of a point of view I thought might be interesting. I think there's too much jargon in the world of marketing and brand per se, and I think often we find ourselves talking to ourselves a little bit, and consequently I think some of the key decision makers and financial stakeholders tend to sort of not take full heed of what we can bring. But when we repackage things and present things in a slightly different way, then I think the penny can drop. We're fortunate to have been working with Singapore Airlines now for some 12 or 13 years, and I've worked with them for a number of years within that. And what's really interesting for me is they have some really powerful intangible assets, notably the Singapore Girl, the Kebaya, and those assets are not in and of themselves something that you could attribute directly to marketing. But they are incredibly powerful assets for the brand. Now, what we've been working with the airline on over the last year or so in preparation for hopefully the great comeback is starting to take that intangible asset and make it work in different ways. So we've kind of recast the Kebaya, or helped them, the airline, recasting the Kebaya in a commercial way. And there's a sort of new commercial form of it, which features slightly different orchids and different floral patterns. You may have read in the news this last week that there is a signature scent that is being designed for the in-flight experience, which is been synthesized from the different flowers in the kabaya. Again, so the brand is, any brand is made up of a number of experiential points, right? I think, again, it's a mistake to associate the brand entirely with marketing. There are a lot of different facets, from the physical environment of the place, the distribution of a place. All of these things impact a brand. I mean, sometimes we talk about physical availability and mental availability. It's another sort of way of framing where the opportunities for brands are. Interesting, looking at the top 10 list, you know, a lot of those brands have strong physical availability. They're market leaders in their sense. DBS has the biggest distribution, Tiger Beer has the biggest distribution, and so forth. So those brands tend to dominate in some vectors because of the space they have, which are the tangibles, I guess. But other factors then start to come into play, which are the sort of I guess, the emotional levers that a brand connects with people, the memories that a brand registers in people's psyche. And ultimately, it's those, I guess, causalities that generate the opportunity for brands to succeed. I mean, one of the things I sometimes talk about, a brand's a bit like flags. Country flags, you know, and you recognize some. You see the stars and stripes, or you see the hammer and sickle, or you see the sort of Chinese national flag, and immediately associate it with certain characteristics, right? But there are many flags. Every country pretty much has a flag, and some of those flags you just don't recognize. They mean nothing. Everyone has one, right? But the meanings and the associations and the positivity or the negativity that comes with it, that is what a brand has. And in the same way that a country is made up of many different facets, physical, historical, political, cultural, the same things apply to brands. And I think what the people responsible for looking at brands in businesses need to understand is they are orchestrators of all of these different levers. And what we need to do is make sure that they are harmonized, because the more harmonic they are, the stronger the brand opportunity is, and particularly in harnessing those intangibles. Because if they align to a certain characteristic, there's a clear, I guess, purpose, there's a clear a reason for being for that brand, and there's a clear understanding of who that brand serves. And there is an alignment in terms of meeting the needs, both the known and the unknown needs, with characteristics that are consistent across all the different experience points. That's how you create a very strong piece of mental availability for your brand, which then allows your brand to punch above its weight, irrespective of the category that it's in, because human beings process lots of different inputs all of the time. There are thousands of brand impressions a day. But the ones who are more coherent, more consistent, as I say with that Singapore Airlines example, use the kabaya, use the girl, use the scent, use the color, use the kind of the high touch luxury experience that Singapore Airlines gives you. The more you can orchestrate all the different components around one feeling, one response, the stronger that brand will be. And certainly, as someone who works with the airline, I'd love to see the airline return back to its rightful position further up your chart, Samir.
Yes, and interesting that you mentioned all these sensory and non-sensory elements that actually go into making the brand. And we always, or sometimes wonder, what is the role of positioning in all this? Technically, it's supposed to summarize everything. And what we've seen, and we do a lot of research every year, and I'm just going to quote the banking sector for now, is all the banks have different positionings. And when we actually do the positioning association, shockingly enough, they all fall flat. So for example, when we put the DBS positioning out there and we ask the respondents, who do you think this positioning belongs to? No more than 30% would recall it to belong to DBS. When we put it for Standard Chartered, no more than 35% again would be imagined to be Standard Chartered's positioning. So with so much of this dilution of positioning, and actually a majority of them would say, oh, I think this is Maybank's positioning, or I think this is OCBC's positioning, or I think this is UOB's positioning, and vice versa. So with so much of the dilution going around, perhaps the role of these sensory elements become even more important. But it may be very possible for a brand like Singapore Airlines. What about some of the other brands? how do they come about using some of
Yeah,
the other elements?
I mean, I'll answer a view quickly, and then I'll defer to
Yeah,
Roger
and
to
then,
add to it.
Roger, I would like to
Yes,
have your thoughts as well.
sure.
Okay, Roger, do you want to go?
It's okay, Robin, you can take it.
Yeah,
on,
Robin.
full.
Okay, no worries. I mean, I think one of the things that we see a lot is that I think there was a sort of a term generated by Byron Sharp about consumers kind of having being cognitive misers. And the premise behind that is that consumers out there can't be bothered to think about brands and companies and their positionings all of the time. It's not a fundamental thing in their psyche. So they typically tend to be quite lazy in attribution. And brands that have the greatest physical availability tend to get attributed many of the characteristics of the category that they lead. So DBS will benefit disproportionately from many of the things that other banks do, because they have the biggest distribution, the biggest customer franchise, and therefore people will naturally associate most things with them. Same in the telco space. Singtel will benefit from most of the innovations that its competitors do, because people don't have the time or the inclination to be thinking about, well, that's StarHub or that's M1 or that's whoever it's coming in. They'll just go, it's a telco thing. Singtel is the one brand I remember. I'll associate with that. Which means it's particularly incumbent on the category of brands that are competing for a space to create clear reasons for people to remember. And I think this is where the opportunity for marketing is to make the brands that they represent interesting and cut through and stand out. Because so many brands and those positionings you talk about, Samir, are remarkably similar. It is hard sometimes to differentiate brand A from brand B from brand C in a category. They're nuanced. They sometimes have a sort of a subtle difference. Quite often, because a lot of the brand conversations are had in isolation. They're often had in a sort of a boardroom vector, where people are looking at the marketplace, they're looking at the consumer insights that they've developed. And if you ask the same people the same questions in the same way, unsurprisingly, you end up with the same answers. And people then get comfort, and certainly non-marketing folks get comfort in being in the company of the familiar. But in the real world, the consumers that we're trying to persuade to switch from a DBS to an OCBC or a DBS to a Standard Chartered, these people are being impacted by so many other things all of the time. We often say in our company that our biggest competitor in marketing any brand is not its rival brands, it's culture, right? Mm-hmm. And what's happening with the Kardashians, what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening with the Olympic Games and the Paralympics, what's happening with the start of the football season and crowds returning to sporting events in other parts of the world. That's what people are talking about. That's what they're following. They're not following whether we have a 0.1% interest rate difference, or we have a particular sustainable deposit, or we have a new kind of corn-based credit card. That's not the thing that they're thinking about the whole time. So how do we make what we present as marketers as interesting and and make sure there's a return on the investment of time we ask of our consumers, in order for us to be able to kind of generate that interest? And by generating that interest, then start to plant some of those memory seeds in people's in their kind of cognitive world. Because it's only if they can plant enough of those memory seeds that the brand starts to actually own some of their recall.
Roger, any closing thoughts on that before we move on to the other questions?
Definitely. Well, basically, in terms of brand itself, right, a lot to do with occupying of the mind shares of the consumer itself. Has got everything to do with the area of experiential marketing itself, and how your consumers are able to actually relate your brand versus the industry. From a marketing point of view, or from a marketer's point of view itself, right, brands, certainly it's a very important aspect in terms of the intangible assets building that earlier we were talking about. And like what Robin has actually brought up, a lot to do with their cultural, right? For consumers itself, I think, the last on their minds, perhaps, what is the value of the brand that's worth? I think that's more towards the stakeholders. But as consumers, I think more importantly, really the recall factor itself on the share of mind. when it comes to brand, and a lot to do with the experience and the customer's journey that the brand has actually put them through, and how it has actually embedded in their mind in terms of recall factor. So from a marketing point of view, I think a lot of emphasis is actually based on building the customer's experience journey. So so in that case itself, I think, on that note, brand, certainly it's a very important aspect. Like what I said, the very day that you started your business itself, the very first day, you are starting to build your value in terms of a brand. So things like, I think for brand finance, you did a very great job. In fact, I had the opportunity to actually attend the brand valuations, the branding awards in China that was being organized by Brand Finance a couple of years back. And that's where you are seeing even traditional brands are starting to actually take note on the valuation of their actual brand itself, despite of building the business for many years. Finally, they realize that the intangible assets of the brand really lies on the customer's recall factor and the experiential itself. So so perhaps this is something that I think for enterprise you should be looking at, whether however small or however medium or large size enterprise. The very day that you start your business, in fact, on a day-to-day basis itself, other than just focusing on the business aspect, the brand building aspect, it's a very important factor that you should not negate.
All right. We have some interesting poll questions, which I'm going to post now. I'll probably go with the first one now. Might be a good time. And after that, I'll come back to both of you for your views on it. This is basically, I'm looking at, does the size of the corporate matters when it comes to the brand choice? So let's see what people have to say about this. You can all vote for any one of them. We'll just leave it on for maybe 10 more seconds. I left the panelist response also can be captured. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if you guys want to share your views secretly on the poll. All right, looks like I'm just going to end this now and share the results here. Well, majority of the people are saying that size does matter, and larger corporates do have better brand building ability and efforts versus the SMEs. There is a mixed view on some, but yes, majority of the people, 68%, are saying that that's how it works. Is that what you've seen in reality also when you guys work with various corporates, that the larger ones always end up building stronger, better brands, and the smaller ones do tend to lose out?
Yep. Samir, maybe I will take on that itself. Well, I own a couple of companies that service the telco industry, right? And through our engagement with them, certainly, the large SME itself, the large MNCs, they have resources, they have funds, right, in terms of engaging consultants to look towards brand resilience, building brand resilience for the corporations. But sadly said, I think the answer is what I expect, perhaps, for SME itself, the challenges really falls with the resources available, right? Whether, how much resources can they allocate towards looking into this. I think the most immediate they probably would want to think is about survival, especially during this pandemic time itself. So pretty much negate the fact that brand building is equally important. So I'm not surprised with most of the poll, I think the poll results that were being shown. However, having said that, there's always rooms to catch up for SME. Being SME owners, you probably have to educate them a bit more and make them realize that, hey, there's this intangible aspect No, do not negate the fact that the intangible aspect is equally important to your physical brick and mortar business itself. Yeah.
So, Robin, the question to you would be, is it just the size, or is it also the understanding on the brand, that there's a lesser understanding of the brand, or there's a lesser understanding of the intangible compared to a large corporate?
Yeah.
Do you think that really is the reason, or is it just the size?
I think it's a question that has a couple of dimensions. I think if you look at just the I guess the investment and the funding available, then clearly a bigger corporation has an advantage because they have deeper pockets and they can do more. But at the same time, big corporations often have a lot of institutional bureaucracy and a lot of tiers of decision making, and that can often stymie the opportunity. If I were to look at some of the most successful brands of the last 10 years globally, they were all, many of them were SMEs in one generation. So in our part of the world, a brand like Grab is now one of the, I'm surprised it wasn't actually on the list, because I would imagine it one of the strongest brands, certainly one of the fastest growing brands, I would imagine, in this part of the world. Didn't even exist a decade ago, I think. So it would have gone very quickly through a phase of being a startup to an SME to something quite different. Airbnb and it's Uber. All of these companies started in a different way. And some of them are tech companies, some of them are in the e-space, and that's not the same as obviously applies to all SMEs. But I think it does go to show that you can build a strong brand from a very small starting point quite quickly. And it doesn't, and branding is not advertising. It doesn't need huge ad budgets. I think, again, another misnomer sometimes is branding equals advertising. It really isn't. A brand is about having a clear vision, fulfilling a clear role, standing for something very distinct in the in a clearly defined customer's mind and in their life, and then out delivering everybody else that might be in the same sort of space in order to drive sort of an exponential growth cycle. And in so doing, it becomes a virtuous cycle that builds the brand, because people start to associate the brand with the good benefit that they're getting from it, and then they trust it, and then off it grows. And then we can see those businesses start to get the funds to then accelerate that growth through marketing communication. So I think a smaller SME has a more limited audience to start with, but they have agility. I think a lot of SMEs miss out on the opportunity that lies in front of them sometimes. There's probably a role for a consultancy to help these businesses really identify how they can tap into an insight and outperform their peers, and thereby be the winning brands. And it'll be a mix of both tangible and intangible assets, I think, that will drive that.
So, Roger, I think next question I would ask you first is, in your experience, again from a MIS point of view, have you guys seen any specific industries that are less brand focused than those? Are there any industries that are inherently less brand focused, who don't really see the value of the brand?
Well, in MIS itself, I think through our engagement with some of both equally MNCs and mainly SME too, we find that it's not just in industry specific, but rather the mindset of the SME itself. And in fact, a lot of SME, like what Robin said, is actually missing out on this part of the building on their intangible assets itself. So I would like to think it's not more of industry specific, but rather on some of the size. Yes, SME, you are able to actually be at any level, in terms of thinking about building your assets in terms of brand. It's the know-how itself and the exposure that they get. And usually SMEs, you do not have a very big or huge team to actually help you to think about the brand strategies, but rather a lot to rely on your intuitions and your exposure in the industries. And in today's context itself, in fact, our government are doing a great job in trying to actually support our SME towards building a brand through various e-commerce platform. So at the same time, giving a lot of fundings towards brand consultancy. So I think, Samir doing a great job in terms of exposing that brand valuation factor towards the SME. So rather than on the industry specific, or I would rather think that, you know, it's really the mindset of the founders of the SME itself that needs to be exposed and changed.
And interesting that you mentioned about the government support and the government funding, which is quite prevalent in Singapore. And the government really tries their level best to make the SMEs grow, make them grow out of the SME sector and make them grow regionally just the same. And I have a quick audience poll, which we'll do, and then we'll see what they have to say about the government grants and the initiative supporting the local SMEs. Do they feel that that is adequate or not? So I'm going to launch the poll now, and then let's just see what people have to say about the government support that's available there. Is it adequate or is it not so adequate? All right, I'm going to end this, and oh, what a result. It's just like 50-50 bang on. And I've been watching it, and it was like, it started off with a lot of yeses, and then very quickly a lot of the no sort of piled in, and then it stopped at 50-50. So, it's either a glass half full or half empty. I would like to believe it's half full there, and that's an interesting way to look at it. Just moving on to are there any interesting examples that come to your mind where the companies have ignored the brand? Maybe just one example each from both of you, where you think the companies have ignored their brand?
A couple of things. Let me have a quick start on that. Let me just move this thing here. First thing I just wanted to add, just to build on what Robert said earlier, and I think just to touch on that SME piece, I think there's a quote. I don't know whose quote it is, so I never attribute it to the right person. So maybe I'll just attribute it to myself. But the quote is that companies make products, but people buy brands. And I think it's a mindset that would help across the small to large business world to think about. People buy what they know, what they're familiar with, what already has some kind of implicit sense of value for them. If they're not doing that, then they're usually buying on a commodity type basis, where they then will buy on price or on another rational factor. So I think if both the smaller entrepreneurs or smaller entrepreneurships and the big companies all understand that as people, we tend to buy things, we tend to go to places, we tend to meet people that we have some kind of concept and relationship with, then I think it shapes, again, takes away some of the jargon that gets in the way. And the more people can understand that all a brand is something familiar. And so an example from my part, I'm just going to go back 20 years, but it was quite a pivotal moment in Singapore's financial history in some respects. I used to, before working with Standard Chartered and before working with Yusimir on Standard Chartered, I spent 5 years working with DBS, and I got to know the CEO of DBS very well. From a previous stint at Standard Chartered, and so we were quite close. And ironically, DBS was thinking about changing its brand. I guess in hindsight, they're very happy they didn't, looking at how strong their brand is. But they were going to change their brand name, and they had a lot of plans for really building this new regional financial brand into a bit of a powerhouse. And one of the things that was going to entail was killing off POSB because it didn't fit. And it was an interesting piece of portfolio thinking, you know, this is where the value is, this is where the future's going. We don't need all the kids and grandmas and grandpas, so we're going to do that. And I remember feeling that was quite horrified at the consequence, not in a philanthropic kind of way, but in the consequence of their plan kind of way. And I think one of the points for raising this is because there are consequences in every decision. And what I said to the CEO of DBS at the time was, if you close your POSB franchise, all of those people will have to find a new home, and they will actually come to your new fancy rebranded DBS. And actually all your plans for kind of creating this halo sophisticated regional powerhouse is going to be compromised by having all of these children and old people who are in there queuing up. when you want to move people into all this new digital and investment kind of space. And I think that the point behind that is they weren't really thinking about the impact of their brand. They weren't thinking about the POSB franchise. Certainly the chairman of DBS at the time wasn't thinking about that strong emotional relationship that the POSB brand had in its community. Fortunately, the best thing you can ever hear as a consultant is when a boss turns around and says,
I can't see
prove
the
it.
TV.
Right.
So we developed a piece of research. We demonstrated what would happen was exactly as we hypothesized. We presented that to Philippe at the time, and he recognized that, and POSB was saved and reinvested in. And now you have a strong DBS brand, which is kind of driving kind of one part of the financial franchise in Singapore, and it has a strong kind of turtle at its back in POSB, which is, you know, protecting the community franchise. And I think that for me is a really sort of powerful example of understanding what a brand can and can't do, but it so nearly would have undermined all of their ambitions with one wrong executive decision.
I have a quick question to Roger, and again, looking at it from an academic point of view, what are the top 3 ROIs that you would want to define for brand and for brand measurement? How should companies measure the brand? What are the top 3 things that they should be looking at?
Okay, thanks, Amir. I think, well, if it were to come from an academic point of view itself, right, I think mainly understanding the brand building process would be utmost important. And of course, the benefit from building the brands, that to me will, in fact, I would like to propose, if any of our government bodies are actually listening to us right now, right, to make brand valuation as mundane to all the SME in Singapore itself. Now, if you're really seriously looking into building our local brands from SME to a unicorn, perhaps, this is something that should be done at a national level. All right. Besides educating them and perhaps, you know, to drive a culture of brand valuation and brand evaluation itself. I think more importantly on brand evaluation, how you actually build and actually evaluate your brand. Right, and subsequently, of course, you know, to make them realize the value of the intangible assets. So, if given a choice, Samir, if I were to run the government, which I'm not likely, I would make it mundane from, you know, with business that probably has a history of about 5 years to 10 years in the market to actually go through the whole exercise to make them realize that the potential of the brand itself on building from an SME and perhaps to one day a unicorn or MNC itself. So, Samir, you know, coming from an academic point of view, I think this is utmost important. And secondly, as most of the SME, I think due to limited resources or limited exposure, the know-how, it's utmost important. And moreover, I think the exposure towards the regional brand itself, understanding the whole landscape, the whole business landscape, your unique selling proposition that you have, and the experiential that you are actually able to translate to your end consumer. I think those are some of the things that are marketing related, and yet at the same time will be able to actually help you to build your brand.
All right, Roger, Robin, what are the 3 ROI measures you would advocate for?
Let's see. I think a brand has to first of all have standout. I go back to evaluating a brand through the journey. Roger mentioned the journey just now, the sort of the customer journey. So if people don't notice you, don't see you, everything else is irrelevant, right? Because you're invisible, right? And you know that's a penalty. So I think the first thing you need to do is actually have some amount of cut through. The second thing is I think you've got to have a sort of a measure around some form of consideration or preference score. What that is exactly, you know, can be determined, but I think there has to be a measure there of desirability in some score, in some way, shape, or form. So you've got to be distinct, you've got to stand out, you've got to have consideration. And the third piece, I think, is very much around relevance to your audience, because I think a brand ultimately doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's in service of people, and only people can make a brand successful because only people ultimately can buy from that brand. So I think if you have cut through, you have some elements of kind of clear sort of differentiation, and you have relevance to the I guess the lifestyles, the purchase behaviors, the category, then you're onto something.
So I'm just going to do a quick poll on do organizations really have any ROI measures? And that's one of the reasons why I think we wanted to hear it from you first. And just coming back to your point, Roger, you made a very interesting point. And the government did have a pilot program many years ago about introducing the valuations to the SMEs. In fact, we propagated that. We actually worked very hard on that, and then they did a pilot program, and IPOS is now driving that reasonably successfully. So there is a funding program, and I think not many organizations are aware of that. But if you want your valuation to be done, you could come to us, and there would be some fundings available from the government side, depending on what program it falls into. But it is something that actually the government approves of and is trying very hard to promote. Also under the IP Hub of Asia agenda that IPOS has, it is an extremely important area for the government. Let's quickly look at what organizations think about the ROI measures. Do people have ROI measures or not? And so I'm just going to launch this poll very quickly. Does your organization have any financial ROI measures for brand? For example, the brand value, or they only have a lot of business ROI measures, for example, the profits and revenues. Which of the two they usually look at? And that's really what the question is about. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. And very interestingly, it says that my organization have financial measures only for the brand or only for the business, and only for the business is actually quite a lot. That's the first one. For the brand is really tiny, and they have for both is sort of somewhere halfway. And I think that goes to prove that most of the organizations are very business focused and not necessarily as brand focused as they should be. So that's an interesting response from the audience. I'm just going to do a quick poll before we move on. Is what KPIs do the management at the board level have? Do they have any for the brand? And let's see what the views are for this one. So do you have any board KPI, brand KPI at a management or board level and at a CEO level? All right, I'm going to close that now and share the results. Very interestingly, the yeses tried very hard to push the no's, but it was a effort that didn't yield any great results, and very few yeses, just about 30%, 70% saying there are no KPIs. Why is the question that I would want to ask to the two of you.
Yeah, I think about this a lot because being someone who promotes the power of marketing and brands, I guess on a daily basis, I think a lot of folks in the kind of the sort of top echelons of organizations see brands as a vanity asset, and thereby any measurement of it is a vanity metric. And I don't think the marketing community helps matters sometimes by obsessing over certain vanity scores like view-through rates and certain sort of media metrics alone. Whereas what I think what I think should be central in getting the sort of the C-suite to reestablish an understanding of brands is the impact that a brand has on their business, right? So a strong brand can lower the cost of sales. That is something that I think the board is interested in. So having metrics that demonstrate the difference between that their brand is bringing to the cost of sales, or the ability of brands to drive growth. So therefore putting metrics in about how much of the brand's growth can be attributed to the power of its brand, or the loyalty that a client, that customers have with it, and how much repeat custom comes based on the business, on the strength of the brand. Or if you're thinking about maybe slightly more defensive mechanisms, you know, again, like you guys do, the value that the brand brings to the balance sheet, that means that they are in a stronger position to either acquire or to fend off acquisition. So I think there are different metrics that can be brought in that make a brand value meaningful to clients in an operational sense.
Yeah. I just have, I'm just going to do a quick poll. And again, now we are in the pandemic, so we could not help but think about the pandemic. So I'm just going to quick poll on the investment that's happened during the pandemic. Basically, it says, has the appetite to invest in promoting the brand has been growing, or has been the same, or has been failing comparable to pre-COVID levels? And let's see what people have to say to that before we get some quick views from both of you. We have about 7-8 minutes left. There is a very interesting audience question, which I'll also answer. While the poll is going on, very quickly, Robin, just what would you choose, growing, same, or drop?
I think the realities are when business suffers or struggles, that marketing gets cut and therefore investment in brand goes down. So I think my instinct is that most organizations would see it cut. However, there are many studies that have been done through different types of financial crisis, not necessarily a pandemic, which shows that the brands that actually invest through a crisis emerge stronger and actually ride a much higher wave coming out. And the pandemic being not an economically triggered crisis, but sort of a natural or biological one. You know, we have been telling many of our brands, obviously maybe not so much the airline because they were not able to fly, but in many categories, like saying, you know, invest when the market is low, and you stand to reap a bigger share of the future when the market rises, and hopefully that will be sooner.
All right, so I've ended the poll now, and I think most of the audience are reasonably aligned. Growing or same is got almost about 75% of the share, and only about 71%, and only 29% saying is drop. So that's quite heartening to see that in Singapore, that's what has been happening. And as you're rightly saying, that why waste a crisis? And that's probably the best time to invest into. Moving on to, do you think companies know their brand value? When they come to you, for example, or when they come to Roger, when they come to MIS, do they really know the brand value?
Hi. Well, I'm not surprised at the poll, but thanks for doing the poll. That really gives us insight itself. Just to perhaps name you an example on what happened to some of my peers from an SME itself. Now, during pandemic itself, right? During this time, it's really, you know, there's pretty much that you can do when it comes to growing your business. So I'm really seeing a lot of them actually putting effort in terms of enhancing their infrastructures, and at the same time trying to enhance the customer's journey during this period of time. So to a certain extent, I think you know, in terms of trying to reach out to their customers or their loyal customers by giving a bit more value towards offering towards them. So your poll itself, it's actually something very interesting, and what we have suspected all along. Where, you know, you can't do much, that much you can do, even during a pandemic time itself. So yeah, so back to your question, Sami, you were saying, you were asking.
Yeah, are we doing a good job? Or I mean, do people, do the brands, or do the people who come to you, do they know the value of the brands, or they do not have any idea? Most of them.
Well, sad to say, Sami, you know, through my engagement with them, most of them will probably knows about, you know, there's certain things that I need to measure in terms of my brand assets, but they do not know the know-how. They do not have the resources. So that's why I think it's utmost important. And we do, I think, Sami, when you were mentioning about the government grants, yes, remember we went to one of the government agencies.
For the ISO committee.
Yeah, the ISO community itself. While there are grants to allow consultancy and brand valuation and to evaluation on your brand itself, but the pickup rate is not there. All right. So the buy-in from the SME or the local enterprise is not there itself. So this is something very sad. You know, I'm really looking at the whole industries, and this to me, right, when the crisis it's on, I think you need to actually pick up what are the opportunities that arises from the crisis itself. Now, so if I am a business owner right now, which I am, you should put a lot of effort into building your resiliency, and branding itself or brand itself is actually one of the most important vehicles to actually ride through this crisis.
So, Robin, the brands that you work for, do they know the brand value, most of them, or they don't? I'm going to launch a poll at the same time.
I think some do. I think where they have established brand teams, so Standard Chartered is an example, Singapore Airlines is an example, I think they do look at their brand value and they do measure and they do reference how that brand value is growing. I think there are people whose jobs it is to really sort of drive a positive uplift in brand. I think for them it is. I think for lots of others, I think some of the dimensions of brand matter. So things like their awareness levels and their persuasion and consideration levels matter, but maybe not a brand valuation would apply to the vast majority. But I do think one of the challenges in brand value is having a standard or agreed set of characteristics that make brand value, right? I think if you look, you answered the question earlier about financial measures versus brand measures. When it comes to financial accounting, it's very clear, right? You have a profit and loss, you have a balance sheet, you have certain things which are standardized and uniform. I think one of the opportunities, but also one of the challenges, is creating a very clear, transparent set of characteristics that value the brand in a very unchallengeable way, so that it becomes a very straightforward and clear measure. And I think if there are different ways and different tools and different levers and different factors that come in, then there isn't a standard accounting system for the brand value. It probably limits the ability for some financial types to fully accept it.
All right, the results are quite encouraging. 63% are saying that the companies do know the value of the brand, and the managements are aware. So that's quite heartening to see there as a poll. So we've talked about the size, we talked about the government support, we talked about the pandemic impact and appetite to invest, etc. So I think we've covered quite a holistic aspects around the brand, around the whether brand is important or business is more important to the people. I think in conclusion, if I were to just ask you, just in yes or no form of an answer, what do you think is more important, brand or business?
Samuel, I'll take on this. I think without any doubt, brand. Of course, right. Business is important for survival. But however, from this pandemic itself, we realize that brand is what really build resilience when it comes to business survival and business continuity.
Okay, Robin. Sorry,
I think they're the same thing. I don't think you can pull them apart per se. It's a little bit like sort of distinguishing between your lungs and your heart. Sometimes they're connected, and I just don't think you can't do one without the other.
All right. We have several examples from my point of view where we've seen that, and an interesting way to look at that is a business cannot survive without a brand. But even if your business is shut down, the brand still survives in some way, then carries on. So that's probably a short answer of where should you be prioritizing and how you should be prioritizing. There was an interesting question earlier about what are the main reasons why sometimes enterprise value might go up as the brand value is dropping or has dropped. The short answer there is the enterprise value, which is linked to the share price, can fluctuate in short term to middle term for a variety of reasons. And the brand value has to be measured in the long term, but share price can go up for there's news in the market. So for example, Mr. Elon Musk suddenly said, I'm going to allow Bitcoin to be used for Teslas, and suddenly the world went crazy. And then a few weeks later, he said, I'm not going to allow that, and the world went crazy again. So the share price is quite volatile based on what's happening in the market, what kind of regulatory changes, market dynamics changes, competitors are coming in or going, and the brand is a lot more resilient in many ways, and that doesn't really fluctuate in that sense. So a lot of times when you might see that there's a sudden spike in the enterprise value, the brand value may actually not be going up in proportion. What that basically means is, look, there's just an artificial increase in the share price for some short spike, and that's not going to be sustained over a longer period of time. No doubt about that in many ways. We are at the end of the session now. Thank you very much both for your contribution, for your time. Thanks to all the participants who joined us. We hope you all benefited from this. Any questions that you may want to ask or have at the back of your mind, do feel free to write to us. This recording will be available. We will send a link to all the participants so that they can just go through some of the aspects again, should they be interested. And all I would say is have a good evening. Stay safe, everyone, and see you again soon with the more interesting set of rankings. We do have the Malaysia event on the 26th. So if anyone is interested in joining that and trying to know more about the Brand Finance Top 100 Malaysian brand rankings, do join that. We will send out the link for that to everyone as well. And feel free to attend that just the same. Thanks to Roger, thanks to Robin for all your time, and thanks to all the participants. Have a good evening, everyone, and yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, everyone.